$37 billion annually. That's billion with a B. $37 billion are lost by Fortune 500 companies alone every single year as a result of poor listening in the workplace. And that's why we really need to talk about this topic today, the business case for listening better. Money is lost every single day in every single business as a result of people not listening well. And the way that money is lost, well, you can probably start to run some numbers. It's lost sales, it's missed deadlines because of misunderstandings or the necessity for rework. It's about failed projections, ill-informed decisions. It's about conflict, unnecessary, unproductive conflict, and a whole host of other problems that stem from simply not listening better. And don't even get me started on the human-to-human losses, the losses in relationships and trust, and creating a sense of well-being, belonging, inclusivity in your workplace. Every bit of this has some implication from not listening well. So we really need to talk about that topic. Before we do, let me welcome you. First presentation in 2023 here on the People First Potential channel on Bright Talk. I'm Deb Calvert, and here on this channel, we provide content at least once a month related to personal effectiveness or to leadership development, soft skills, human resources, employee engagement, and the like. So I hope that you'll check out all the other content that's available here on demand. Be sure to look right here underneath the video. You've got some options. One of them is called attachments. And if you'll use that attachment, it'll give you the PDF of the slides for this presentation and some bonus resources and other next steps that you could be taking to learn more about this topic. Now, for those who are new to Bright Talk, let me tell you also that we really, really appreciate it when you give us a little bit of feedback at the end. Let us know what you liked about the presentation, what you'd like to see us doing differently, what other topics would be of interest for you. We read all of those comments and we appreciate them very, very much. Now, the business case for I do want to start with the obvious, that hearing is not the same thing as listening. There's a difference. Hearing, for those who are abled, hearing requires no effort. It's a passive, involuntary act. Listening is the act of doing something with whatever it is that you're hearing. And I'm going to be challenging you today to think about what it is that you're doing when you're listening versus hearing, and what it takes, not just to listen, which is a notch above hearing, but to actively listen. That involves more concentration, processing, and commitment. And in fact, to go even further into listening with empathy, listening in a way that lets people really feel heard and understood. Now, as I said, I'm Deb Calvert, and we produce all sorts of contents related to the topics I mentioned earlier. I do want to point out that whether you're here live or if you've come in later on demand, we always appreciate your questions. And if you're on demand, or if I didn't get to your questions during the live presentation, please use my email address that you see on screen now and just shoot me a question anytime. I always enjoy being able to engage with the viewers here and to take the conversations to the place where you'd like them to go. You'll also see right here a couple of websites. People First PS, that's our core business. We've been around for going on 18 years. And you'll find a wealth of information and resources there. But newer, only 18 months old, is People First Potential. That's People First Leadership Academy. And there are tons of interactive workshops. Many of them are free. So as opposed to this one-way presentation, if you're looking for something a little more personalized, a little more interactive and fun, because we use all kinds of tools over there to make it fun, I invite you to come and check out what's on the Academy and see if we can provide some additional value for you there. Okay, now the business case for better listening is about that $37 billion I mentioned at the very beginning. But there's another very important high cost that I would like you to consider. It's not just the business case for your business. It's the business case for you personally. An investment that you make in time spent improving your listening skills, well, that is going to pay you great big returns in terms of the rapport and the trust you establish with others, and in terms of how others can see you as credible and effective, and how much faster and better you'll be able to do whatever work you're trying to do, because you'll be wielding more influence and because you'll have more information from a broader variety of perspectives. Listening better always pays back huge dividends. So please keep that in mind. It's for your business, but it's for the business of you as well. So back to those fundamentals. Um, I already said that hearing is just bare minimum, entry level. And we're going to be going for something more than that. But I'm going to go ahead and keep breaking the pieces down here. Passive listening, hearing, that's what we do quite often, especially if we're multitasking, especially if we're in a meeting and it doesn't seem like it's 100% spot on relevant for us. It's listening when we're not fully and actively engaged. And the bad news is, when you're listening this way, it's usually more obvious than you think it is to the speaker. I mean, sure, you know that you're supposed to occasionally nod or give a but those acknowledgments are sometimes misplaced or not quite appropriate because you didn't catch the full context. So, what's natural, if you're really listening and if you're really responsive to the person who's speaking, what's natural is that you pick up on the subtle cues, the pauses that somebody makes when they're speaking, or when they begin to talk a little more rapidly, or things become a little more agitated or excited, or when they hem and haw, can't quite come up with the words, or, well, leave something unsaid. What's natural when you hear those tones or those subtle cues is that you respond in kind, that you pick up where they left off, that you lean in, that you ask a question, that you show an empathetic look. When you're passively listening, you're doing none of those things. You're just sort of waiting for something that catches your attention, something that feels a little bit more relevant to you. And you're not acknowledging what's been said nonverbally. You're not responding with an emotion in kind. You're really showing up as just halfway listening, halfway paying attention, and it creates a wall, a distance between you. Now, having said that, we do need to admit that it's not always easy to listen actively. Let's face it. On average, the facts tell us people in a business setting can pay attention for about 60 seconds. That's on the high side, for about 60 seconds without being distracted by an unrelated thought. For most people, though, that attention span is closer to 30 seconds. We've been together for about 10 minutes here. How many random, unrelated thoughts have you had, even as you came to a presentation about listening? And that's no fault of your own. That's just human nature. No matter how fast I talk, your brain is able to think faster than I speak. And so your brain is filling in the gaps. And that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to listen and give our full attention to other people. Now, here's another barrier. Maybe you've never thought about this. Listening is a discipline, it's a learned, acquired skill. And if you're thinking about it more like you think about hearing, just something you do naturally without even ever considering it, well, then you wouldn't take the time or put in the effort to develop that skill and discipline. I blame the class we all had to take back in about 8th grade. It was a communications class of some sort. And in that class, we all got in front of the rest of the classroom, and we had our 3x5 index cards, and we were required and graded on giving a speech. We gave a speech. And everybody else in the classroom, as we were giving that speech, everybody else, well, they zoned out. Or maybe they thought about their own speech that was coming up because they were still nerve-wracked about that. But what we never learned in that class was the value on the other side of communication, the value on listening. We learned how not to listen, just how to sit passively. So, for a lot of reasons, this is an underappreciated skill, and it carries forward into today's business meetings. I mean, think about it. How many times have you been in a business meeting where somebody said, "Wow, that was such a great presentation," or, "Hey, I loved that question that you asked"? You've probably heard those kinds of statements, that reinforcement of the speaking in many forms, many times. But how often have you ever walked out of a meeting and somebody said, "Hmm, you are such a good listener. I really appreciated how you listened today"? It just doesn't happen. And it should, because the cost to businesses when people don't listen are huge. You could look at the work you've done over the past 2 weeks and identify without much effort several times when not listening because you didn't listen, because someone else didn't listen. It required you to repeat yourself, to do rework, to ask clarifying questions, or to actually make a mistake and go the wrong direction. So it's worth it. Worth it to build this skill, even though the world doesn't signal to us just how important listening really is. Now, it's also difficult because we don't often listen with an open mind. We don't often keep an open mind. Instead, we leap to judgments, we make assumptions, we rely on our past knowledge and experience, we talk over each other, we interrupt, we finish each other's thoughts in order to anchor the conversation or to run away with it in the direction that we think it's going without any ill intent. We think these are efficiencies. We do this in order to be able to go faster, and yet it actually slows us down when we have to backtrack. And of course, it's easy to fake it. We've all been conditioned sometimes to fake our listening. The whole myth of multitasking, well, the premise of that is that we're only halfway listening to something or halfway paying attention to something while we do something else. And in a virtual world, with more and more of our time spent on screen, this is all the easier than it's ever been. So we all do it, we all accept it, and we all pay the price for it. The benefits of listening. When you get this right, when you improve even in little ways, the benefits are huge. Listening is essential. If you want to earn the right to comment on and be involved with others' issues or concerns, then you have to listen effectively and you have to be perceived as fully listening, because only then are people willing to hear your advice or ask for your support. There has to be a connection formed by listening first. If you cut to the chase without having earned the right to do so, that'll usually be interpreted as arrogant or self important. And it can lead to a feeling of mistrust or a feeling that you've been dismissed by somebody. But when you listen, when you really listen, it signifies that you're interested in somebody else. You're even willing to enter into the speaker's world. By showing that kind of willingness, you differentiate yourself from others who don't listen as well. And this is the beginning of trust. Everything related to trust stems from this important initial connection. Think about someone in your life, anyone in your life who you really trust. And one of those reasons you trust them will almost certainly include that they listen to you and that they've tried to understand you. Now, when you really listen to someone, you also benefit because you gain knowledge. You gain insight into that person and whatever subject they're talking about. You won't miss key points. You won't gloss over the stuff that you think you already know. And at the same time, you'll be making the speaker feel important, ennobled, appreciated, and respected. When they feel that way, of course, now they want to reciprocate and give you time, attention, and information in return, and take what you have to say with a higher measure of confidence and respect. When you listen well, conversations improve, misunderstandings are minimized, work gets done faster, people connect and trust one another more. Team cohesiveness and the results that come from it are all bolstered by good listening. Now there's a something else I need to tell you about listening. Listening is one of only two compensator competencies. That's a mouthful. Try saying that 5 times fast. A compensator competency means that when you don't have other certain skills or knowledge, other competencies, that people will give you a little grace, a little space to catch up, a little forgiveness because you don't have those skills. And they give you that grace because you're a good listener. And they know that because you're a good listener, you'll eventually catch up. And the value that you bring with your good listening is important to them. That makes listening a master skill. And yes, by the way, the other compensator competency, it's learning agility, being nimble and quick in how you apply information. Listening is a master skill. So if you don't work on anything else, work on this one. It'll help you get by for all the other skills and knowledge that you may not have. We should talk about the contrast. This is not meant to be an indictment. I, too, am guilty of every single thing on here. But when we're in a poor listening mode, these are the kinds of mistakes that you might be making. If you're trying to decide whether somebody is a poor listener or a good listener, these are the sorts of things that you're looking for too, at least subconsciously. Poor listeners, they interrupt. They talk over other people. They respond a little too quickly, either with an abrupt nod or with a way to cut into what's being said, or not having thought through the answer when the speaker is finished. You can tell they've been doing all of that inside their head instead of really, really listening. They might one-up every single point made or jump to conclusions. They'll probably ask close-ended yes-no questions instead of yielding the floor and asking broader open-ended questions that invite more from the speaker. They'll be very quick to give their ideas. They might even try to squelch what other people would contribute. They make assumptions, they make judgments, they go for solutions, and they bounce quickly from one conversation or task to another. Now, keep in mind, all of these things are probably well-intended. They may look downright rude. They may seem a little condemning when put together like this in a list. But the reason people do these things is because they want to make things go faster, or they genuinely believe that they already know something and that they can contribute sooner. So when you see these behaviors on someone's part, don't be too upset with them. They're intending this for the good. Keep this in mind, though, as I give you the contrast. What we're aiming to do instead of these behaviors of poor listening, we're aiming to be better listeners, because this is where you save your business money and you create better credibility and effectiveness for yourself. Good listeners do all of these things, and we'll probe a few of these a little bit more in depth as we go into some additional slides here. So let me just give you the high-level overview here. Good listeners do all of these things. I'm going to especially emphasize the ones you see here in bold. Empathetic listening Beyond active listening is that you hear and you understand and you process and respond to what's been said, as well as how it was said, the emotion behind it. You're listening on purpose for both the content and the feeling of the speaker. Here's a trick, a tip, and that is to listen for what's different. You may already be conditioned, and it's easy. It comes naturally to listen for what's familiar, but you can train your brain to do things differently and become a better listener by this one alone. Bullet number 4 here. And as I said, I'm going to take all of these just a little deeper. So stay tuned for that one because it does make a huge difference. You might consider, you've got a PDF of these slides, you might consider using this as a self-assessment. So in the attachments tab underneath the video here, take the PDF, take the slide and turn it into a self-assessment for yourself or for coaching others. Because every time you are exhibiting one of these behaviors of good listeners, you want to recognize it and acknowledge it so that you'll see more of it from others and can see the value of it for yourself. All right, so bullet 1, let's talk about that one a little bit more in depth. Good listeners, they get clarification. They understand that communication is not measured by how well the message was delivered. Good communication is measured by how well the message was received, how clear it was, how it compelled action or got something done, how understood it was. So as a listener, you have this responsibility to receive the message, to make sure you understood it. And to do that, you may need to get clarification. So good listeners, they play it back, they paraphrase. It might feel a little artificial if you're parroting something back to somebody. But remember, my own words echoed back to me, that feels pretty good. It doesn't feel like you are a parrot. It feels like you're really smart because you heard me and you played it back to me. You could change the meaning just a little bit, put a bit of interpretation in there if you don't want to paraphrase it exactly as it was said. But somehow play back your understanding just to check and make sure that you got it right. And if there are some pieces that you didn't fully understand, well, you want clarity there too. You're not going to look stupid. You're going to look smart because you understood better as opposed to glossing over something. If you really don't understand all of it, everything that's been said, and you need to go a little deeper, just say, I'm not sure I understand here. I need some clarification. Put it right on out there. If you hear the tone in someone's voice, if you hear that they're talking fast or talking slow, and there's some emotion that's being conveyed, you could get clarity on that too. Hey, I hear you. Sounds like this is something you're struggling with. Tell me more about that struggle. Or maybe it's, okay, that one sounds like it's really important to you. Did I get that right? Is that the top priority? And never assume. Never assume. Good listeners don't assume. They get clarity and they play back what's been said, and that builds trust. And it makes fewer mistakes because of the understanding being so solid. You heard me say a couple times already, as we were talking about clarity, that good listeners ask questions. Good listeners especially asks open-ended questions instead of close-ended questions. See, closed-ended questions, they're great for just clarifying a simple point. Did I get that right? All the helper verbs you see over on the right-hand side, all the helper verbs are the first words in close-ended questions. They can all be answered with a yes or a no. And because of that, people don't think long. They just give you a short answer. Did I get that right? Is there anything else you need to tell me? Will you be sending that in an email? If all you want is a yes, no, those are fine ways to start out your questions. But as a listener, building trust, getting clarity, establishing relationships, making sure that mistakes are not made, responding to emotion, and all those sorts of scenarios, You're going to be better off if you're using an open-ended question. Who, what, where, when, why, how, which. Those are the question words that cannot be answered with a yes or no. These are sentences that end in question marks. Those are the words at the beginning of them. They are more powerful than the close-ended questions that start with helper verbs. And every once in a while, you may want to sprinkle in the most powerful question of all, technically not a question, but a command statement. Tell me more. Help me understand. Describe, explain, walk me through. These are invitations. They're command statements that invite the other party to go deep, to think, and give you expansive answers. And when you can invite and receive and really fully listen, you'll get all sorts of things that you never thought were even possible. As you're doing that, make sure that it's not just the content. Passive listeners, that's what all they listen for, the content, blah, 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 blah. Then I hear a word that is related to me, and I perk up and I listen better. But even through the blah, 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 there's probably some feeling. There's probably something that the speaker is emphasizing. The way that they're saying it, regardless of what they're saying, might impact how you receive it if you give yourself a chance to hear it. Empathy, it's all about putting yourself into the other person's shoes. It's about letting the speaker feel heard and felt. So noticing what the speaker seems to be emphasizing because they repeat it or because they have extra energy around it, or in some ways they emphasize it. Knowing that that's important to them, even if it's not new information to you, now you know it's important to them. That matters. Or making sure that you don't miss the feelings that are being conveyed, because that matters too. And human to human, we respond to people we care about with feeling, not just with content. So this is reciprocal. Okay, here's one that I told you was really important. This is a pro tip. This is about training your brain to declutter itself and be better at listening, even though you're going to have encroaching thoughts many, many times while a person is speaking, about every 30 seconds. But if you will train your brain, if you will deliberately remind yourself over and over again to tune in for what's different, not what's the same, not what's familiar, but what's different, that will force you not to make assumptions. It will force you to delay any interruptions or comparisons. See, contrasts, they take longer to process. They require more cognitive understanding. So if you focus to look for those contrasts, what's different from what you already know, that's a great listening strategy. We are predisposed to listen to what's familiar. We have the unconscious bias of familiarity bias. So things that are familiar are already more comfortable for us. And then we're taught that we should look for what we have in common with people. So we lean into that. We pay attention. We look for that. We are taught to be efficient, expedient. So we look for the places where we already know something. We already have some experience. And then we overemphasize that piece of it. And in the midst of all of that familiarity response, we're losing our opportunities to notice and respond to what's different. So watch for it. When does the speaker's tone change? When does the speaker offer an opinion that's different from what you've heard from them before or what the group has discussed already? What's changing in the speaker's level of confidence? Did they really get amped up and you can tell this is absolutely in their wheelhouse and they're powerfully inspired by it? Or do they start to stutter and hold back a little bit and you can tell they're not as confident? Listen and watch for those kinds of differences. Your brain at that moment will be forcing you to listen better. You'll pick up other things too. And you'll find that you're getting much, much more out of most presentations or conversations than you used to. Now, remember, all these benefits, and I'm just wanting to remind you here that this is what we're after. All these benefits are about your business case. You become more credible. You become more trustworthy. You demonstrate the character of actually having cared about someone else. You're building emotional commitment, which is the very heart of employee engagement. Employee engagement is defined as the emotional connection that someone feels toward their work that causes them to apply additional discretionary effort. So you benefit, the people you're listening to benefit, the organization benefits, and it is a compensator competency. So you want to make sure that you're not missing out on the opportunity to have this master skill. Now, I want to say just a little bit more about these benefits of improved listening, about the different levels of listening, because there are these 3 levels that I've teed up. Think about what's the difference. Think about how it feels to be listened to in any one of these ways. And then, yes, go ahead and think about situationally which one fits, which one is most appropriate. So, a reminder, passive, it means the sound is falling on your ears. You're hearing. You're taking in bits and pieces, mostly what's familiar or what's most relevant for you. You're tuning out a whole lot of everything else. Actively listening, well, that's when you are receiving the information, you're thinking about it, processing it, you're forcing yourself to stay tuned in as opposed to letting yourself become distracted by all the other encroaching thoughts and everything else that's around you. And then empathetic listening, that's listening for the feeling as well as the content. It's about picking up on those subtle cues, the ones that tell us how somebody is feeling about what they're saying, and then being able to respond in a way that is about what was said as well as how it was said. Situationally, I get it. You might be thinking, well, this doesn't have any place in the workplace. This empathetic listening at a level where I'm really understanding a person's emotions, I don't think that belongs in the workplace. But it does. Before somebody was whatever job title they may hold, a salesperson, an HR representative, an accountant, before somebody was a job title, they were a person. And fundamentally, humans, they have emotions. They bring their whole selves to work. And if we ignore that, we erect walls between us. We cause people to feel like they are just a number. It begins to feel like it's all business and not about the individual at all. And where does that get us? Didn't get us anywhere. So let me give you just a little bit more about these 3. You could use this as a checklist or a self-assessment too. This is a really good place for some additional self-reflection. What you see here are those same 3 categories of listening levels: passive, active, empathetic. And you're looking to see what kind of a listener you are. So these are the differences. Are you listening in the first row? Are you listening with your ears, brain, or heart? Are you listening for those triggers that are relevant for you, the ones that you really have to pay attention to? Or are you listening for information and actions? Or are you listening for an understanding, to gain an understanding of what you're hearing and of the person who's saying it? Where's your primary focus? Is it on other things? Is it on how you're going to respond? Or is it on the needs of that speaker? And that's how you use this little tool. It will help you to gauge where you are and to think about potentially going someplace different as a listener. I'm going to give you just a few more tips here in the time we have remaining. Some of this is going to be very elementary, but keep in mind, it's about that $37 billion or whatever math you've used to figure out how much time is lost, how much relationships are damaged, how much rework has to be done, how much missed opportunity there might be. If you're going to be a really good listener, for those times, those situations where good listening is required, here are some tips. Don't let yourself be subject to a lot of distractions. You get to choose. Where will you meet? How will you meet? What channel are you going to use? Clear your mind. Don't pick a time right before you have to go into another high pressure meeting and there's zero chance that you can really focus on someone. Go ahead and turn off the ping, turn off your phone, turn off the laptop, whatever it is that's likely to distract you, and dedicate yourself fully to paying attention to this individual. Now, this is not suitable for every conversation, but if you have one-to-ones, for example, with team members, well, that's a time that it really does make sense to be distraction-free, to ennoble the other individual by giving them your full 100% attention. The meeting will go faster, it will go better, you'll get a lot of ground covered, and you'll create that sense of trust and bond between you. And as you're listening, when you're truly distraction free and you're listening at a higher level, here are some things that you can do to draw the speaker out. Eye contact, not piercing, constant, but a little more frequent than it would be when you're distracted. Appropriate nods. Now, I should tell you that I'm a head bobber. I nod up and down a lot when people are speaking. I mean it encouragingly, like, I hear you. Tell me more. I understand. Maybe you do too. But a lot of people don't interpret nodding in that same way. People sometimes interpret nodding as, come on, I get it. Go ahead, faster, get it out. And they think that you're trying to cut them off with your nods. So use this judiciously, watch the situation, see what's going on with the other party and how they respond. And if you have to control your nod, my tip, because I use it all the time, is to put my chin on my hand, to rest my chin on my hand, because that forces me to not be able to nod. When you're encouraging someone, you're asking questions, but you're not just peppering them with yes, no questions. You're asking insightful questions, open-ended or command statement questions. And then as they respond, you're not pretending to listen. You're thoughtful. You're listening for what's different. You're reflecting and you're considering what they're saying and how they're saying it. When people are open with you and they share, you can encourage them to do more of the same by praising it. Hey, wow, thank you for telling me about that. I really appreciate it. A little compliment like that goes a long way. Naturally, if you're attentive, well, sure, people are more willing to open up and to stay open when you're attentive. A mantra you might consider for yourself is that it's better to be interested than to be interesting. We're flipping the script on those old 8th grade classes, those speech classes and places where the emphasis was always on whoever was up on center stage. It's much better, human to human, to be a receiver, a good receiver than a sender. And when someone's speaking, even if you don't agree, be careful that you haven't prematurely shut them down or judged what they're saying based on an assumption. If you don't agree with what they're saying, try this. They've put it out there, the statement that you don't agree with. Instead of reacting to it, first say, oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. Let's make sure that what they've said is what you heard. Let's find out, how committed are they? Why do they believe what they believe? Find out just a little bit more before you respond. It'll give you a chance to gather a bit more information, and it will give you a chance to make sure the speaker feels acknowledged and fully heard rather than trounced. All right. This is a good time. Those of you who are here live, a good time to post any remaining questions. I will tell you for everybody who is listening to this that we have tons more resources related to listening. Listening is a master skill. It's worth spending a lot of time and attention on it. One thing I can recommend to you, it's fun, it's interesting, it's really good for teams, is to consider taking the Echo Listening Assessment. That is a tool that will help you identify your own habits of listening. And if you do it with a group of people, well, then you'll find out what their habits are too. We can create a little group profile and you can find out the strengths and the differences and how people are listening. It'll then help you to all become better communicating with each other. And with any of those assessments, whether it's one to one or in a group setting, I'll also give you some coaching so that this can be very highly relevant and targeted right to whatever it is that you'd like to work on. Over on People First Leadership Academy, we have a workshop. It's interactive. It's called Become a Better Listener. And so I encourage you to check that one out. That's the People First Potential website. There are 40 plus classes over there. A lot of them are free. So be sure you check that out. And then we also do customized team workshops. So if there are any communication gaps or any team tensions that you're experiencing, we can help you. And we can do it fast, we can do it affordably, we can do it virtually. Trust me, there are things you can do other than going to a ropes course and spending a ton of money. And overnight, you can see positive change within your team. So, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Deb Calvert, and we do every month a presentation here on Bright Talk. So, I hope that you'll come back and join me for the next one. Let me tell you just a little bit about it here.